Question 1. The risk matrix shows a high probability of significant soil degradation and water contamination associated with the proposed new fertilizer technology. Considering the Agro Institute entrance exam's emphasis on sustainable agricultural development and stakeholder well-being, which of the following approaches best aligns with the Institute's ethical and regulatory obligations? Option A. Reduce investment in environmental impact studies and focus on marketing the immediate benefits of the fertilizer to secure funding and expedite its release to the market. Option B. Allocate additional resources to research and development focused on mitigating the identified soil and water risks, even if it delays the commercialization timeline and increases initial development costs. Option C. Lobby for changes in environmental regulations to lessen the perceived severity of soil degradation and water contamination risks associated with the new technology. Option D. Proceed with the commercialization of the fertilizer technology as planned, assuming that the identified risks are manageable and will not significantly impact the environment or public health in the short term. Correct answer is B. Allocate additional resources to research and development focused on mitigating the identified soil and water risks, even if it delays the commercialization timeline and increases initial development costs. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate financial interests of the Institute with the long-term sustainability and ethical implications of its research practices. The Agro Institute entrance exam, as a regulatory framework, emphasizes responsible innovation and stakeholder engagement. The risk matrix highlights potential negative impacts, necessitating a proactive and ethically sound response. The correct approach involves prioritizing the development of sustainable agricultural practices that mitigate environmental risks, even if it means a slower initial return on investment. This aligns with the core ethical principles of agricultural research, which aim to benefit society and the environment. Specifically, regulatory guidelines for agricultural research institutions often mandate a precautionary principle, requiring proactive measures to prevent harm to ecosystems and human health. Furthermore, ethical frameworks within academic institutions stress the importance of transparency and accountability to all stakeholders, including the wider community and future generations. Investing in research that addresses identified risks demonstrates a commitment to these principles and fosters public trust. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing short-term revenue by overlooking the identified environmental risks is ethically unsound and potentially violates regulatory mandates. Such an approach disregards the long-term consequences of unsustainable practices, which could lead to significant environmental degradation, reputational damage for the Institute, and potential legal liabilities. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost-cutting by reducing investment in risk mitigation research, despite the matrix indicating high potential impact, is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a failure to adhere to due diligence and a disregard for the Institute's responsibility to manage foreseeable risks. Finally, an approach that attempts to downplay or ignore the risks presented in the matrix, hoping they will not materialize, is a dereliction of professional duty and a violation of the principles of responsible research governance. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the identified risks and their potential consequences. This involves consulting the risk matrix and related data, engaging with relevant stakeholders, including researchers, environmental experts, and potentially community representatives, and evaluating potential solutions against ethical principles and regulatory requirements. The decision should then be guided by a commitment to long-term sustainability, responsible innovation, and the mitigation of foreseeable harm, rather than solely by short-term financial gains. Question 2. The investigation demonstrates that the agricultural cooperative is facing significant financial strain, leading some members to advocate for cutting costs by reducing investments in soil regeneration and water conservation practices. Despite these practices being central to the Agro Institute's environmental stewardship guidelines and national agricultural regulations, which approach best aligns with professional responsibility and regulatory compliance. Option A. Delay the implementation of water conservation measures until a formal warning is received from regulatory bodies, while continuing soil regeneration efforts at a reduced capacity. Option B. Implement the recommended soil regeneration techniques and water conservation measures as mandated by the Agro Institute's guidelines and relevant national regulations, seeking financial support or phased implementation plans if necessary. Option C. Prioritize immediate cost reduction by discontinuing soil regeneration and water conservation efforts to improve short-term financial performance. Option D. Lobby for temporary exemptions from environmental regulations, citing the cooperative's financial difficulties, to allow for a suspension of soil regeneration and water conservation practices. The correct answer is C. Prioritize immediate cost reduction by discontinuing soil regeneration and water conservation efforts to improve short-term financial performance. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the immediate financial pressures of a farming cooperative and the long-term environmental sustainability mandated by agricultural regulations. The cooperative's members, focused on maximizing short-term yields, may overlook or downplay the significance of regulatory compliance regarding soil health and water usage. The challenge lies in balancing economic viability with legal and ethical obligations to protect natural resources, which are crucial for the future of agriculture. Careful judgment is required to ensure that decisions are not solely driven by immediate profit, but also by a commitment to sustainable practices and regulatory adherence. The correct approach involves prioritizing the cooperative's adherence to the Agro Institute's established environmental stewardship guidelines and relevant national agricultural regulations. This approach is right because it directly addresses the core of the investigation's findings by acknowledging the regulatory framework as paramount. By implementing the recommended soil regeneration techniques and water conservation measures, the cooperative demonstrates a commitment to long-term sustainability, which is a fundamental requirement for operating within the agricultural sector and aligns with the Agro Institute's mission. This proactive stance mitigates future regulatory risks, enhances the cooperative's reputation, and ensures the continued viability of its land resources. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost reduction by ignoring the recommended soil regeneration techniques would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for regulatory mandates concerning land management and environmental protection, potentially leading to penalties, fines, and reputational damage. Such an approach prioritizes short-term financial gain over long-term ecological health and legal compliance. Another incorrect approach that involves delaying the implementation of water conservation measures until a formal warning is issued by regulatory bodies is also professionally unsound. This reactive stance demonstrates a lack of foresight and a failure to proactively manage environmental risks. It suggests a willingness to operate at the edge of compliance, which is ethically questionable and invites potential legal repercussions and operational disruptions. A third incorrect approach that seeks to lobby for exemptions from environmental regulations based on the cooperative's financial difficulties would be inappropriate. While financial challenges are real, they do not supersede the legal and ethical obligations to protect the environment. This approach attempts to circumvent established rules rather than finding compliant solutions, undermining the integrity of the regulatory system and setting a dangerous precedent. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of all applicable regulations and guidelines, such as those set forth by the Agro Institute. Professionals must then assess the potential impacts of different courses of action on both the organization's financial health and its environmental responsibilities. A framework that integrates risk assessment, stakeholder consultation, including regulatory bodies and cooperative members, and a commitment to ethical conduct and legal compliance is essential. Prioritizing proactive compliance and sustainable practices, even when they involve initial investment or operational adjustments, is key to long-term success and responsible stewardship. Question 3. The analysis reveals that the Agro Institute is facing a significant budget shortfall, and a large agricultural corporation has offered a substantial donation. However, the corporation's offer is contingent on the Institute exclusively researching and promoting the corporation's proprietary seed varieties, potentially at the expense of other research avenues and the promotion of diverse agricultural practices. Considering the Institute's mission to advance agricultural science and education for the public good, which approach best aligns with professional, ethical, and regulatory expectations for such an institution. Option A. Negotiate with the corporation to accept a portion of the donation without the exclusive research and promotion clauses, or seek alternative funding sources that align with the institute's mission. Option B. Accept the donation with the stipulated conditions to immediately address the budget shortfall and leverage the corporation's resources for research. Option C. Publicly disclose the corporation's offer and its conditions to gauge public opinion before making a decision. Option D. Reject the donation outright due to the restrictive conditions, even if it means significant program cuts and potential staff layoffs. The correct answer is B. Accept the donation with the stipulated conditions to immediately address the budget shortfall and leverage the corporation's resources for research. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the immediate financial interests of the institute and the long-term sustainability and ethical considerations of its agricultural programs. The institute's leadership must balance the need for funding with its responsibility to uphold academic integrity and ensure the practical relevance of its research and teaching. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing demands without compromising the institute's mission or its reputation. The correct approach involves prioritizing the long-term viability and ethical standing of the Agro Institute by seeking diverse funding sources that do not impose undue influence on research direction or curriculum development. This approach aligns with the principles of academic freedom and institutional integrity, which are paramount in any educational institution, especially one focused on scientific advancement and public good. Specifically, it adheres to the implicit guidelines of maintaining research independence and avoiding conflicts of interest that could arise from accepting funding tied to specific commercial outcomes that might not align with broader agricultural sustainability or public benefit. This ensures that the Institute's work remains objective and serves the best interests of the agricultural sector and society as a whole, rather than being dictated by the narrow interests of a single donor. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on securing the largest immediate donation without due diligence on the donor's intentions or the potential impact on the Institute's autonomy would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the ethical imperative to protect institutional independence and the integrity of its research. Accepting funding with strings attached, such as dictating research topics or influencing publication of results, directly violates the principles of objective scientific inquiry and could lead to biased outcomes, eroding public trust and the Institute's credibility. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes short-term financial gains by accepting funding that might compromise the Institute's environmental or social responsibility commitments would also be professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a failure to consider the broader ethical implications of the Institute's work and its role in promoting sustainable agricultural practices. Such a decision could lead to reputational damage and undermine the Institute's mission to contribute positively to the agricultural landscape. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough assessment of potential funding sources, considering not only the financial benefits, but also the donor's reputation, their alignment with the Institute's values, and any potential conditions or expectations attached to the funding. A robust due diligence process, including consultation with relevant academic departments and ethics committees, is crucial. The Institute should establish clear policies on accepting donations and managing potential conflicts of interest to ensure that all funding decisions are made in the best interest of the institution and its stakeholders, upholding academic integrity and long-term sustainability. Question 4. Benchmark analysis indicates that the Agro Institute's new crop development research aims to significantly increase yield within a 2-year timeframe. Considering the regulatory framework for agricultural research and development within this jurisdiction, which of the following approaches best balances the research objectives with the principles of sustainable agriculture and stakeholder engagement? Option A. Focus exclusively on maximizing crop output through the application of high-intensity fertilization and irrigation, with minimal consideration for long-term soil fertility or water resource impact, to meet the aggressive yield targets. Option B. Develop and implement research protocols that integrate advanced soil health management techniques, water-efficient irrigation systems, and biodiversity monitoring, while actively seeking feedback from local farming communities on the practical applicability and potential impacts of proposed methods. Option C. Prioritize the use of novel but largely untested agrochemical inputs that promise rapid growth, without conducting comprehensive environmental safety studies or consulting with regulatory bodies on their long-term ecological implications. Option D. Proceed with research using established, but potentially less sustainable, methods to ensure rapid data generation, deferring any environmental impact assessments or stakeholder consultations until after initial yield results are obtained. The correct answer is B. Develop and implement research protocols that integrate advanced soil health management techniques, water-efficient irrigation systems, and biodiversity monitoring, while actively seeking feedback from local farming communities on the practical applicability and potential impacts of proposed methods. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a research project with the long-term sustainability and ethical considerations of agricultural practices. The pressure to achieve results quickly can lead to shortcuts that might compromise environmental integrity or stakeholder trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that research objectives do not inadvertently lead to unsustainable practices or violate established agricultural guidelines. The correct approach involves prioritizing the development of research methodologies that are both effective and environmentally sound, aligning with the principles of sustainable agriculture and the regulatory framework governing agricultural research. This means actively seeking out and integrating best practices for soil health, water conservation, and biodiversity preservation within the research design itself. Such an approach demonstrates a commitment to responsible innovation and adheres to the spirit and letter of agricultural regulations that aim to protect natural resources for future generations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing yield without considering the environmental impact fails to acknowledge the interconnectedness of agricultural productivity and ecological health. This could lead to practices that deplete soil nutrients, increase water pollution, or harm beneficial insects, ultimately undermining long-term sustainability and potentially violating environmental protection laws. Another incorrect approach that disregards the input of local farmers and community stakeholders overlooks the crucial role of local knowledge and social license in successful agricultural initiatives. Ignoring these perspectives can lead to research that is impractical, culturally insensitive, or met with resistance, hindering adoption and potentially creating conflict, which is contrary to ethical engagement principles and can lead to regulatory scrutiny regarding community consultation. A further incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of data collection over the rigor and ethical implications of the methods employed risks generating unreliable results and could lead to the adoption of flawed practices. This approach neglects the scientific integrity expected in research and may violate guidelines concerning data quality and ethical research conduct. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough assessment of potential environmental and social impacts alongside research objectives. This includes consulting relevant agricultural regulations, engaging with diverse stakeholders, including farmers, environmental experts, and community representatives, and adopting a precautionary principle where potential risks are not fully understood. Prioritizing research methods that promote sustainability and ethical conduct ensures that scientific advancement contributes positively to the agricultural sector and society. Question 5. To address the challenge of increasing food demand in a region with limited water resources and fragile soil, which approach best balances the immediate needs of the community with the long-term sustainability of agricultural practices, as would be expected of a candidate for the Agro Institute entrance exam? Option A. Introducing genetically modified crops designed for rapid growth, without extensive local testing or consideration for their long-term ecological impact. Option B. Focusing exclusively on high-yield, water-intensive crops that are in high demand by external markets to maximize immediate economic returns. Option C. Implementing a diversified farming system that incorporates drought-resistant crops, water-efficient irrigation techniques, and soil conservation methods, coupled with community education on sustainable practices. Option D. Advocating for large-scale water diversion projects from neighboring regions, regardless of the potential environmental consequences in those areas. The correct answer is C. Implementing a diversified farming system that incorporates drought-resistant crops, water-efficient irrigation techniques, and soil conservation methods, coupled with community education on sustainable practices. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a community with the long-term sustainability of agricultural resources, all within the framework of the Agro Institute entrance exam's regulatory environment. The decision-maker must consider the ethical implications of resource allocation and the potential for unintended consequences on both human and environmental stakeholders. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed solution aligns with the principles of responsible agricultural practice and community well-being, as implicitly guided by the exam's focus on agricultural science and its societal impact. The correct approach involves a comprehensive assessment of the local ecosystem's carrying capacity and the socio-economic impact of different farming methods. This approach is right because it prioritizes evidence-based decision-making and sustainable resource management, which are fundamental tenets of responsible agricultural practice. By considering the long-term viability of the land and the well-being of the community, it aligns with the implicit ethical obligations of agricultural professionals to act as stewards of the environment and to promote equitable development. This aligns with the spirit of an agricultural institute's entrance exam, which seeks candidates who understand the interconnectedness of ecological, economic, and social factors in agriculture. An approach that focuses solely on maximizing immediate crop yield without considering soil health or water availability is ethically flawed. It risks depleting natural resources, leading to long-term environmental degradation and potentially harming the community's future food security. This fails to uphold the professional responsibility of an agricultural practitioner to ensure sustainable practices. An approach that prioritizes external market demands over local food security needs is also ethically problematic. While market integration is important, neglecting the immediate nutritional and economic needs of the local population for the sake of potentially volatile external markets demonstrates a lack of consideration for the primary stakeholders within the community. This can lead to social inequity and undermine the very purpose of agricultural development. An approach that relies on unproven or experimental farming techniques without adequate risk assessment or community consultation is professionally irresponsible. It exposes the community and the environment to potential harm without a clear understanding of the consequences, violating the principle of due diligence and potentially leading to irreversible damage. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multi-stakeholder consultation, a thorough environmental impact assessment, and the development of a phased implementation plan that allows for monitoring and adaptation. Professionals must prioritize solutions that are ecologically sound, economically viable, and socially equitable, always with a view towards long-term sustainability. Question 6. The review process indicates that a faculty member in the Department of Agronomy has a significant personal financial investment in a private agricultural technology company. This company is a potential beneficiary of research findings from a grant application submitted by the faculty member to an external agricultural research foundation. Which of the following represents the most ethically and regulatorily sound approach for the faculty member and the Agro Institute? Option A. The faculty member should proceed with the grant application and research as planned, assuming their professional integrity will prevent any bias. Option B. The faculty member should quietly divest their financial interest in the company before the grant is awarded to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Option C. The faculty member should immediately disclose their financial interest to the Agro Institute's Research Integrity Office and the External Funding Foundation, requesting guidance on managing the potential conflict of interest. Option D. The faculty member should withdraw from the grant application and any associated research to completely avoid any potential conflict. The correct answer is C. The faculty member should immediately disclose their financial interest to the Agro Institute's Research Integrity Office and the External Funding Foundation, requesting guidance on managing the potential conflict of interest. Explanation: The review process indicates a potential conflict of interest involving a faculty member and an external research grant. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the pursuit of academic research and funding with the imperative to maintain academic integrity and avoid impropriety. The Agro Institute entrance exam, like many academic institutions, operates under a framework of ethical guidelines and regulations designed to ensure fairness, transparency, and the responsible stewardship of research funds. A faculty member's personal financial stake in a company that stands to benefit from research conducted under their supervision, especially when that research is funded by an external grant, presents a clear risk of bias and undue influence. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing interests and uphold the institute's reputation and the integrity of its research output. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent disclosure of the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate institutional body, such as an ethics committee or research integrity office. This allows the institution to assess the situation, implement mitigation strategies, and ensure that the research is conducted impartially and in the best interest of the academic community and the public. This aligns with the ethical principles of transparency, accountability, and the avoidance of conflicts of interest, which are fundamental to academic research and are typically codified in institutional policies and broader research ethics guidelines. An approach that involves proceeding with the research without disclosing the conflict of interest is ethically and regulatorily unsound. This failure to disclose creates an undisclosed conflict, which can lead to biased research outcomes, misallocation of grant funds, and a breach of trust with the funding body and the institution. It violates the principle of transparency and can have serious consequences, including reputational damage and potential sanctions. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to downplay the significance of the financial interest or to argue that it does not influence the research. While the faculty member may genuinely believe this, the appearance of a conflict of interest is often as damaging as an actual one. The ethical obligation is to disclose and allow for an independent assessment, rather than self-assessing and potentially overlooking subtle biases. This approach fails to meet the standard of proactive disclosure and can be seen as an attempt to circumvent institutional oversight. Finally, an approach that involves withdrawing from the research project solely due to the conflict, without any disclosure or attempt at mitigation, might seem like a safe option but could also be professionally detrimental. While it avoids the direct conflict, it may also mean losing valuable research opportunities and expertise that could benefit the institute. The more constructive professional reasoning process involves identifying the conflict, disclosing it promptly, and working collaboratively with the institution to find a solution that allows the research to proceed ethically and with appropriate safeguards in place. This demonstrates a commitment to both research advancement and ethical conduct. Question 7. What factors determine the most appropriate approach for introducing new crop protection technology to smallholder farmers within the regulatory framework of sustainable agricultural development? Option A. The availability of government subsidies for new crop protection products and the perceived innovation of the technology. Option B. The cost-effectiveness of the new technologies and the potential for rapid market adoption by farmers. Option C. The scientific validation of integrated pest management (IPM) strategies, their environmental impact, and their economic feasibility for farmers. Option D. The immediate effectiveness of new synthetic pesticides in controlling pests and the potential for increased crop yields. The correct answer is C. The scientific validation of integrated pest management (IPM) strategies, their environmental impact, and their economic feasibility for farmers. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of agricultural producers with the long-term sustainability goals mandated by regulatory bodies. The Agro Institute entrance exam, in its focus on agricultural policy and practice, expects candidates to understand the multifaceted nature of agricultural development, where economic viability, environmental stewardship, and social equity are interconnected and often subject to competing stakeholder interests and regulatory frameworks. Careful judgment is required to navigate these complexities and propose solutions that are both practical and compliant. The correct approach involves prioritizing the development of integrated pest management (IPM) strategies that are scientifically validated and environmentally sound, while also considering the economic feasibility for farmers. This aligns with the overarching regulatory framework for sustainable agriculture, which typically emphasizes reducing reliance on synthetic pesticides, protecting biodiversity, and minimizing environmental contamination. Such an approach is ethically sound as it promotes the long-term health of both agricultural systems and the wider ecosystem, and it is regulatorily compliant by adhering to guidelines that promote ecological balance and responsible resource management. An approach that solely focuses on introducing new, highly potent synthetic pesticides, even if they offer immediate pest control, is ethically problematic and regulatorily non-compliant. This is because it disregards the potential for environmental damage, harm to non-target organisms, and the development of pesticide resistance, all of which are typically addressed by stringent regulations aimed at promoting biodiversity and minimizing ecological disruption. Furthermore, an approach that neglects to consider the economic capacity of smallholder farmers to adopt new technologies or practices would be ethically questionable, as it could exacerbate existing inequalities and fail to achieve widespread adoption, thereby undermining the intended policy goals. Finally, an approach that prioritizes short-term yield increases without any consideration for long-term soil health or water quality would be in direct conflict with regulatory mandates for sustainable land use and environmental protection. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant regulatory objectives and ethical principles. This involves identifying all key stakeholders and their respective interests, assessing the scientific evidence for proposed solutions, and evaluating the economic and social implications of each option. A systematic risk-benefit analysis, informed by regulatory guidelines and ethical considerations, should then guide the selection of the most appropriate course of action. Question 8. The risk matrix shows a high probability of significant environmental impact and potential community opposition associated with the proposed expansion of a large-scale monoculture farm into a previously undeveloped area. The project timeline is aggressive, with pressure from investors to begin operations within 6 months. Which of the following approaches best aligns with responsible agricultural stewardship and the likely expectations of the Agro Institute entrance exam? Option A. Focus solely on optimizing operational efficiency and cost reduction for the expansion, assuming that any environmental issues can be addressed reactively as they arise. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive environmental impact assessment and engage in proactive consultations with local community representatives and relevant environmental bodies to inform the expansion plan and mitigate potential negative consequences. Option C. Proceed with the expansion immediately to capitalize on market opportunities, deferring detailed environmental studies and community consultations until after operations have commenced. Option D. Prioritize securing all necessary permits and licenses based on preliminary information, with the intention of conducting more detailed environmental and social impact analyses once the expansion is operational. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the expansion immediately to capitalize on market opportunities, deferring detailed environmental studies and community consultations until after operations have commenced. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial pressures of a new agricultural venture with the long-term sustainability and ethical considerations of land use and community impact. The Agro Institute entrance exam expects candidates to demonstrate an understanding of responsible agricultural practices and stakeholder engagement, not just profit maximization. The correct approach involves prioritizing a thorough environmental impact assessment and engaging with local community stakeholders before committing to the proposed expansion. This aligns with the principles of sustainable agriculture and responsible land management, which are fundamental to the Agro Institute's curriculum and likely reflected in its entrance exam's regulatory framework. Such an approach demonstrates foresight, ethical responsibility, and a commitment to long-term viability, considering potential environmental degradation and social disruption as significant risks that must be proactively managed. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining the Institute's reputation and ensuring graduates are equipped to operate ethically and sustainably. An approach that focuses solely on immediate cost reduction and operational efficiency, without considering environmental and social externalities, is ethically flawed and potentially non-compliant with emerging agricultural regulations that emphasize sustainability and community benefit. This approach risks significant reputational damage, legal challenges, and long-term operational instability due to unforeseen environmental consequences or community opposition. An approach that delays comprehensive risk assessment in favor of rapid implementation overlooks the potential for irreversible environmental damage and the erosion of community trust. This can lead to significant remediation costs, regulatory penalties, and a loss of social license to operate, all of which are detrimental to a new agricultural enterprise and contradict the ethical principles expected of future agricultural professionals. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multi-stakeholder perspective. This includes identifying all relevant stakeholders, e.g., local communities, environmental agencies, future employees, investors, understanding their concerns and expectations, and integrating this understanding into the risk assessment and decision-making process. A robust risk management framework should encompass not only financial and operational risks, but also environmental, social, and ethical risks, ensuring that decisions are made with a holistic view of long-term sustainability and responsible stewardship. Question 9. Market research demonstrates a significant consumer interest in enhanced nutrient profiles for a new line of organic produce. The marketing team proposes highlighting these perceived benefits on packaging and in promotional materials, suggesting claims such as boosts immunity and improves cognitive function based on preliminary, non-peer-reviewed internal studies. Considering the regulatory framework for agricultural product labeling and marketing, which of the following represents the most responsible and compliant course of action? Option A. Develop marketing materials that focus on the organic certification and general healthfulness of the produce, without making specific, unsubstantiated claims about enhanced nutrient profiles or direct health outcomes. Option B. Commission further extensive, peer-reviewed scientific studies to rigorously validate the specific health benefits before any marketing claims are made, even if this delays the product launch. Option C. Proceed with the proposed marketing claims, as consumer demand is high and the internal studies, while preliminary, suggest potential benefits. Option D. Immediately launch the new product line with the proposed enhanced nutrient profile, claims to capitalize on market interest, and address any regulatory concerns if they arise later. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the proposed marketing claims, as consumer demand is high and the internal studies, while preliminary, suggest potential benefits. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a desire to innovate and expand market reach, and the strict regulatory requirements governing agricultural product labeling and claims. The Agro Institute entrance exam expects candidates to demonstrate an understanding of how to navigate these complexities ethically and legally. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any new marketing initiatives are not only commercially viable, but also fully compliant with the established regulatory framework, preventing potential harm to consumers and reputational damage to the institution. The correct approach involves prioritizing thorough regulatory review and seeking expert legal counsel before launching any new product or marketing campaign. This demonstrates a commitment to upholding the integrity of agricultural product information and adhering to the principles of responsible innovation. Specifically, it aligns with the regulatory framework's emphasis on accuracy, truthfulness, and the prevention of misleading claims, ensuring that all stakeholders, including consumers and regulatory bodies, are treated with respect and transparency. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on market demand, without adequate regulatory scrutiny, fails to acknowledge the legal obligations and ethical responsibilities associated with agricultural product marketing. This can lead to violations of labeling laws, resulting in fines, product recalls, and a loss of consumer trust. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or unsubstantiated claims for marketing purposes directly contravenes the regulatory requirement for evidence-based claims. This not only misleads consumers, but also undermines the credibility of the institution and the agricultural sector as a whole. A third incorrect approach that attempts to circumvent or interpret regulations loosely, without seeking clarification or expert advice, risks significant legal repercussions and ethical breaches. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the relevant regulatory landscape. This involves proactive engagement with legal and compliance departments, conducting thorough due diligence on all claims and marketing materials, and prioritizing ethical considerations alongside commercial objectives. When faced with ambiguity or novel situations, seeking expert advice and erring on the side of caution are paramount to ensuring compliance and maintaining professional integrity. Question 10. The risk matrix shows a high probability of equipment failure within the next 2 years for the cooperative's primary irrigation system, which could lead to significant crop loss and increased operational costs, but the immediate cost of a full upgrade is substantial. The cooperative's board must decide on the best course of action. Option A. Initiate a limited repair program based on the cheapest available parts and labor to address the immediate failure risk, without considering the long-term impact on system efficiency or member costs. Option B. Conduct a thorough risk assessment involving all stakeholders to explore phased upgrade options, potential financing strategies, and the long-term implications of both upgrading and deferring the upgrade, aligning with principles of responsible cooperative management and sustainable agricultural practices. Option C. Immediately postpone the upgrade to minimize immediate expenditure, focusing only on minor, temporary repairs to keep the existing system operational for as long as possible. Option D. Proceed with the most expensive, state-of-the-art upgrade immediately without further consultation, assuming it will eliminate all future risks. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough risk assessment involving all stakeholders to explore phased upgrade options, potential financing strategies, and the long-term implications of both upgrading and deferring the upgrade, aligning with principles of responsible cooperative management and sustainable agricultural practices. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial pressures of a farming cooperative with the long-term sustainability and regulatory compliance mandated by the Agro Institute entrance exam framework. The cooperative's management faces a dilemma: to address a critical infrastructure issue that impacts operational efficiency and potentially future yields, or to prioritize immediate cost savings that might be perceived as more palatable to members in the short term. The Agro Institute entrance exam framework, as it pertains to agricultural cooperatives, emphasizes responsible resource management, adherence to environmental standards, and transparent communication with stakeholders. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that considers not only the financial implications, but also the operational, environmental, and reputational risks associated with both addressing and delaying the infrastructure upgrade. This approach aligns with the Agro Institute entrance exam's emphasis on forward-thinking agricultural practices and robust governance. Specifically, it requires engaging with all relevant stakeholders, including the cooperative members, regulatory bodies, if applicable to the exam's scope, and potentially external agricultural experts to gather diverse perspectives and ensure informed decision-making. The regulatory framework for agricultural cooperatives, as understood within the context of this exam, would likely mandate a duty of care towards members and the environment, necessitating proactive measures to mitigate foreseeable risks. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost reduction without a thorough risk assessment fails to uphold the cooperative's long-term viability and may contravene principles of prudent financial management and responsible stewardship. This could lead to greater financial burdens in the future due to escalating repair costs or operational inefficiencies. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes a quick fix without consulting members or understanding the full scope of the problem neglects the cooperative governance principles of transparency and member participation, which are often implicit in agricultural cooperative regulations. This can erode trust and lead to dissatisfaction among members. Third incorrect approach that involves deferring the decision indefinitely without a clear plan for future action is a failure to manage risk effectively and demonstrates a lack of strategic planning, which is contrary to the principles of sustainable agricultural development promoted by the Agro Institute entrance exam. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear identification of the problem and its potential impacts. This should be followed by a systematic evaluation of all feasible solutions, considering their short-term and long-term consequences. Crucially, this process must involve consultation with relevant stakeholders to ensure that decisions are well-informed, equitable, and aligned with both regulatory requirements and the cooperative's overarching objectives. The framework should prioritize risk mitigation, ethical considerations, and the long-term sustainability of the cooperative's operations. Question 11. The evaluation methodology shows a scenario where an agricultural research institute is considering a substantial funding offer from a private agricultural company for a project focused on developing drought-resistant crop varieties. The company has expressed a strong interest in the project's outcomes and has requested early access to preliminary data and the right to review all research publications before their public release. Considering the Agro Institute entrance exam's regulatory framework, which of the following approaches best upholds the Institute's ethical obligations and scientific integrity? Option A. Agree to the company's request for early access to all preliminary data and the right to review and approve all publications, prioritizing the donor's satisfaction to ensure continued funding. Option B. Accept the funding immediately to secure resources for the project, deferring detailed discussions about data sharing and publication rights until after the initial research phase is complete. Option C. Negotiate a comprehensive funding agreement that clearly defines data ownership, intellectual property rights, and the Institute's sole authority over the timing and content of all research publications, while ensuring the donor receives timely, anonymized progress reports. Option D. Inform the company that their requests regarding data access and publication review are unacceptable and seek funding from alternative sources that do not impose such conditions. Correct answer is C. Negotiate a comprehensive funding agreement that clearly defines data ownership, intellectual property rights, and the Institute's sole authority over the timing and content of all research publications, while ensuring the donor receives timely, anonymized progress reports. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows a scenario where an agricultural research institute seeking to secure funding for a novel crop resilience project. The challenge lies in balancing the institute's scientific integrity and the need for robust, unbiased data with the expectations and potential influence of a significant private sector donor who has a vested interest in the project's success. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires navigating potential conflicts of interest, ensuring transparency in research outcomes, and maintaining public trust in the institute's findings, all while fostering a productive relationship with a crucial funding source. The institute must adhere strictly to the Agro Institute entrance exam's regulatory framework, which emphasizes ethical research conduct, data integrity, and transparent reporting. The correct approach involves proactively establishing clear guidelines for data sharing and intellectual property rights with the donor before any research commences. This includes defining how results will be disseminated, ensuring the institute retains control over the publication of findings, and outlining any potential commercialization pathways in a manner that does not compromise scientific objectivity. This approach aligns with the Agro Institute entrance exam's regulatory framework by prioritizing transparency, preventing undue influence on research outcomes, and safeguarding the Institute's reputation for independent scientific inquiry. It demonstrates a commitment to ethical research practices and responsible stakeholder engagement. An incorrect approach would be to accept the funding without clearly defined terms regarding data ownership and publication rights. This risks the donor attempting to influence the interpretation or withholding of results that might be unfavorable to their commercial interests, thereby violating the Agro Institute entrance exam's principles of data integrity and unbiased reporting. Another incorrect approach would be to agree to exclusive rights for the donor to review and approve all publications before they are released. This directly compromises the institute's ability to disseminate its findings freely and promptly, potentially delaying crucial scientific advancements and undermining the principle of open scientific communication mandated by the regulatory framework. A third incorrect approach would be to downplay or omit any potential negative findings in preliminary reports to the donor to maintain their favor. This constitutes a breach of ethical reporting standards and misrepresents the research process, directly contravening the Agro Institute entrance exam's emphasis on accurate and complete data dissemination. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. This involves identifying potential conflicts of interest early, engaging in open and transparent communication with all stakeholders, and establishing clear, written agreements that protect the integrity of the research process and the institution's reputation. A proactive approach to risk management, focusing on the ethical implications of funding relationships, is paramount. Question 12. The performance metrics show a significant increase in research output and publications directly linked to a new partnership with a large agrochemical corporation. However, concerns have been raised internally about the potential for this partnership to influence research direction towards products favored by the corporation, potentially overlooking more sustainable or organic farming methods. The Institute's leadership is considering how to best manage this situation to maintain both its research reputation and its commitment to diverse agricultural practices. Option A. Focus on promoting the positive research outcomes and publications resulting from the partnership, while downplaying any internal concerns about potential bias in research direction to avoid negative publicity. Option B. Accept the funding and continue with the current research trajectory, assuming that the corporation's interests will naturally align with advancements in agricultural productivity. Option C. Publicly disclose the full details of the partnership, including funding amounts and any specific research objectives agreed upon, and establish an independent ethics review board to oversee all research conducted under this partnership, ensuring alignment with the Institute's broader mission. Option D. Immediately terminate the partnership to avoid any perception of conflict of interest, even if it means losing significant research funding and opportunities. The correct answer is C. Publicly disclose the full details of the partnership, including funding amounts and any specific research objectives agreed upon, and establish an independent ethics review board to oversee all research conducted under this partnership, ensuring alignment with the Institute's broader mission. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial interests of the Institute with the long-term sustainability and ethical implications of its research practices. The pressure to secure funding can lead to compromises that might not align with the core mission of academic integrity or the responsible stewardship of agricultural resources. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing demands. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and ethical conduct in all research partnerships. This means clearly disclosing all funding sources and potential conflicts of interest to all stakeholders, including students, faculty, and the public. It also entails ensuring that research objectives remain aligned with the Institute's academic mission and do not unduly benefit the funding entity at the expense of broader agricultural advancement or environmental well-being. This aligns with the Agro Institute's guiding principles of integrity and responsible innovation, which are implicitly expected in any reputable academic institution. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing short-term financial gains without considering the ethical implications of the research or the transparency of the funding would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to a perception of bias in research outcomes, damage the Institute's reputation, and potentially violate ethical guidelines regarding research integrity and conflicts of interest. Another incorrect approach that involves accepting funding from entities with questionable environmental or ethical track records without due diligence would also be a failure. This demonstrates a lack of responsible stewardship and could expose the Institute to reputational damage and ethical scrutiny. A further incorrect approach that involves withholding information about the funding source or the research's potential impact from relevant stakeholders undermines trust and transparency, which are fundamental to academic and research institutions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough risk assessment of potential funding sources, a clear understanding of the Institute's ethical guidelines and mission, and open communication with all stakeholders. Prioritizing long-term reputation and ethical integrity over immediate financial benefits is crucial for sustainable success. Question 13. Quality control measures reveal a minor but consistent error in the scoring algorithm used for a specific section of the Agro Institute entrance exam. This error, if unaddressed, could lead to a slight but measurable disadvantage for a subset of applicants. The Institute must decide how to proceed with the admissions cycle. Option A. Inform only the faculty involved in admissions about the error and allow them to make discretionary adjustments to individual applicant scores based on their judgment. Option B. Immediately inform all applicants about the scoring error, explain the steps being taken to correct it, and reevaluate the affected section scores for all candidates, potentially adjusting admission offers accordingly. Option C. Publicly announce the scoring error and immediately halt the admissions process until a complete reevaluation of all exam components can be conducted. Option D. Proceed with admissions as planned, assuming the error is minor enough not to significantly impact overall admission decisions, and address it in future exam cycles. The correct answer is B. Immediately inform all applicants about the scoring error, explain the steps being taken to correct it, and reevaluate the affected section scores for all candidates, potentially adjusting admission offers accordingly. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need to address a quality issue with the long-term implications for stakeholder relationships and the institute's reputation. The Agro Institute entrance exam, like any educational institution, has a duty of care to its applicants and a responsibility to maintain the integrity of its admissions process. Decisions made in such situations can have significant ethical and regulatory ramifications, impacting trust and fairness. The correct approach involves transparent communication with all affected stakeholders, including applicants, faculty involved in the exam, and potentially regulatory bodies if applicable to the Agro Institute's operational framework. This approach prioritizes honesty and fairness, acknowledging the error and outlining the steps being taken to rectify it. This aligns with ethical principles of accountability and integrity, and any relevant guidelines for educational admissions that emphasize fair treatment of applicants and the maintenance of academic standards. By proactively informing stakeholders, the Institute demonstrates a commitment to resolving the issue responsibly and mitigating potential negative consequences. An incorrect approach that involves concealing the quality control findings from applicants and proceeding with admissions as planned would be a significant ethical failure. This would violate the principle of fairness by potentially admitting students based on a flawed assessment process, and it would erode trust between the institute and its applicants. Furthermore, it could lead to reputational damage and potential challenges to the validity of the admissions if the issue is discovered later. Another incorrect approach, such as immediately invalidating all exam results without thorough investigation and clear communication, could also be problematic. While it addresses the quality issue, it might be an overreaction that unfairly penalizes applicants who were not affected by the flaw. This approach lacks proportionality and fails to consider the impact on individuals who may have performed well on unaffected portions of the exam. It also bypasses the crucial step of transparent communication and due process. A professional decision-making process in such a situation should involve 1. A thorough investigation to understand the scope and impact of the quality control issue. 2. Consultation with relevant internal committees or legal counsel to determine the appropriate course of action based on institute policies and any applicable regulations. 3. Developing a clear communication strategy for all affected stakeholders. And 4. Implementing a fair and transparent resolution that upholds the integrity of the admissions process. Question 14. Governance review demonstrates that a new high-yield crop variety developed by the Agro Institute shows promise for significantly increasing farm incomes in the region. However, preliminary environmental impact assessments suggest potential risks of increased water usage and soil nutrient depletion if not managed with specific, resource-intensive practices. The project team is under pressure to fast-track commercialization to meet investor expectations and secure further funding. Considering the Agro Institute's commitment to sustainable agriculture and responsible innovation, which of the following approaches best reflects the required professional and ethical conduct? Option A. Delay commercialization to conduct more extensive, long-term studies on the crop's environmental impact and develop comprehensive, sustainable management protocols in collaboration with local agricultural communities and environmental experts. Option B. Proceed with rapid commercialization, focusing on the economic benefits, and address potential environmental issues through future mitigation strategies as they arise. Option C. Prioritize investor demands by fast-tracking commercialization and implementing only the minimum required environmental safeguards to meet basic regulatory compliance. Option D. Focus solely on the crop's yield potential, assuming that market forces will naturally incentivize farmers to adopt sustainable practices over time. Correct answer is B. Proceed with rapid commercialization, focusing on the economic benefits, and address potential environmental issues through future mitigation strategies as they arise. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the immediate financial pressures of a project and the long-term sustainability and ethical considerations of agricultural practices. The Agro Institute entrance exam, by its nature, emphasizes responsible and sustainable agricultural development, which often requires balancing economic viability with environmental stewardship and community well-being. Careful judgment is required to ensure that decisions align with the Institute's mission and the broader ethical framework governing agricultural research and practice. The correct approach involves prioritizing the long-term ecological health and community benefit over short-term economic gains. This aligns with the core principles of sustainable agriculture, which are implicitly or explicitly part of the Agro Institute's regulatory framework and ethical guidelines. Specifically, it upholds the principle of intergenerational equity, ensuring that current resource use does not compromise the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It also reflects a commitment to responsible innovation, where new technologies are evaluated not just for their immediate productivity, but also for their broader impact. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing immediate yield and profit without adequate consideration for environmental impact fails to adhere to the principles of sustainable development. This could lead to soil degradation, water pollution, and biodiversity loss, which are contrary to the ethical obligations of agricultural professionals, and potentially violate specific environmental regulations that the Agro Institute would be expected to uphold. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes the demands of external investors without independent scientific assessment risks, compromising the integrity of research and development. This could lead to the adoption of practices that are not scientifically sound or are detrimental to the environment or local communities, violating ethical standards of objectivity and public trust. A further incorrect approach that dismisses community concerns as secondary to project timelines overlooks the importance of social license to operate and the ethical imperative to engage with and respect the stakeholders most directly affected by agricultural practices. This can lead to social conflict and undermine the long-term viability of any agricultural initiative, contradicting the Institute's commitment to community engagement and equitable development. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that involves a thorough risk assessment, considering environmental, social, and economic factors. This includes consulting relevant scientific literature, engaging with diverse stakeholders, and adhering to established ethical codes and regulatory guidelines. The process should prioritize long-term sustainability and responsible innovation, ensuring that decisions are transparent, evidence-based, and aligned with the overarching mission of promoting beneficial and sustainable agricultural practices. Question 15. Operational review demonstrates that a new crop development project at the Agro Institute is facing significant pest infestation. The project team is considering two primary pest management strategies, one that utilizes a highly effective but environmentally controversial chemical, which is cheaper and faster to implement, and another that involves a more complex, integrated pest management (IPM) system with a higher upfront cost and a longer implementation timeline, but with demonstrably lower environmental impact. The project is under pressure to show early yield results. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the principles of responsible agricultural practice and regulatory compliance expected of an institution like the Agro Institute? Option A. Negotiate with the chemical supplier for a bulk discount on the environmentally controversial chemical, arguing that the cost savings will allow for future investment in environmental remediation, thus balancing immediate needs with future responsibilities. Option B. Prioritize the immediate implementation of the Integrated Pest Management (IPM) system, allocating necessary resources and time for its proper execution, despite the higher initial costs and longer timeline, to ensure long-term sustainability and minimize environmental risks. Option C. Proceed with the cheaper and faster chemical treatment, as the primary objective is to achieve early yield results and demonstrate project viability, with the understanding that environmental concerns can be addressed in later phases if necessary. Option D. Delay the decision on pest management until further research can definitively prove the long-term economic benefits of the IPM system, while using minimal, less effective treatments in the interim to manage the immediate infestation. The correct answer is B. Prioritize the immediate implementation of the Integrated Pest Management (IPM) system, allocating necessary resources and time for its proper execution, despite the higher initial costs and longer timeline, to ensure long-term sustainability and minimize environmental risks. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the immediate financial pressures of a project and the long-term sustainability and ethical considerations of agricultural practices. The Agro Institute entrance exam, by its nature, would expect candidates to demonstrate an understanding of responsible agricultural stewardship, which extends beyond mere productivity to encompass environmental impact and community well-being. Careful judgment is required to balance economic viability with ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. Correct approach involves prioritizing the implementation of sustainable pest management strategies, even if they incur higher initial costs or require more time. This aligns with the principles of responsible agricultural practice, which are likely to be implicitly or explicitly embedded within the regulatory framework and ethical guidelines governing agricultural institutions. Such an approach demonstrates foresight, a commitment to long-term ecological health, and adherence to best practices that minimize environmental harm and potential future remediation costs. It also reflects an understanding of the broader stakeholder interests, including the local community and future generations who rely on healthy ecosystems. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the cheapest and quickest pest eradication method, disregarding potential environmental consequences, fails to uphold ethical agricultural standards. This could lead to regulatory breaches if specific pesticides are banned or restricted due to their environmental impact, or if they violate local environmental protection laws. Furthermore, it neglects the long-term economic implications of environmental degradation, such as soil contamination or harm to beneficial insects, which can ultimately reduce farm productivity and increase future costs. Another incorrect approach that involves delaying the adoption of sustainable practices due to perceived cost barriers, without a clear plan for future implementation or mitigation, is also professionally unsound. This demonstrates a short-sighted perspective that prioritizes immediate financial gains over long-term sustainability and regulatory compliance. It risks accumulating environmental debt and potentially facing stricter regulations or public backlash in the future. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough risk assessment that considers not only immediate financial costs, but also environmental impacts, regulatory compliance, and long-term sustainability. This includes consulting relevant agricultural guidelines, environmental impact assessments, and seeking expert advice on sustainable practices. Professionals should adopt a proactive stance, integrating ethical considerations and regulatory requirements into project planning from the outset, rather than treating them as secondary concerns. Question 16. The risk matrix shows a high probability of soil degradation and water contamination if current irrigation practices continue, alongside a moderate risk of negative public perception due to these environmental impacts. The Institute's Budget Committee is pushing for the cheapest immediate solution to maintain profitability for the upcoming academic year. What is the most professionally responsible course of action for the Agro Institute's leadership? Option A. Immediately halt all irrigation activities to eliminate the risk of soil degradation and water contamination, regardless of the impact on crop yields and the Institute's operational capacity. Option B. Seek emergency external funding specifically for immediate irrigation system replacement without first developing a comprehensive long-term sustainability plan for the Institute's agricultural operations. Option C. Implement a phased approach to upgrade irrigation systems and adopt water-saving agricultural techniques, prioritizing the most critical areas first, while initiating a public awareness campaign about the Institute's commitment to sustainability. Option D. Continue with current irrigation practices to minimize immediate expenditure, deferring any upgrades until a more financially opportune moment, and focus on public relations to counter potential negative perceptions. The correct answer is C. Implement a phased approach to upgrade irrigation systems and adopt water-saving agricultural techniques, prioritizing the most critical areas first, while initiating a public awareness campaign about the Institute's commitment to sustainability. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate financial interests of the institute with the long-term sustainability and ethical implications of its agricultural practices. The risk matrix highlights potential negative outcomes, necessitating a decision that prioritizes responsible stewardship and compliance with the Agro Institute's governing regulations. The correct approach involves prioritizing the mitigation of environmental risks and ensuring compliance with the Agro Institute's sustainability guidelines. This aligns with the core mission of an agricultural institute to promote responsible and ethical practices. Specifically, it adheres to the Agro Institute's internal regulations, which mandate environmental impact assessments and the adoption of sustainable farming methods. This proactive stance not only safeguards the institute's reputation, but also ensures its operations contribute positively to the agricultural sector and the environment, fulfilling its educational and research mandate without compromising future viability. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on short-term cost savings by ignoring the identified environmental risks would be professionally unacceptable. This would violate the Agro Institute's internal regulations concerning environmental stewardship and could lead to significant long-term costs associated with environmental remediation, regulatory fines, and reputational damage. Furthermore, it would contradict the ethical obligation of an agricultural institution to lead by example in sustainable practices. Another incorrect approach that involves delaying a decision to gather more data without implementing immediate, albeit temporary, risk mitigation measures would also be professionally unsound. While data gathering is important, the identified risks require immediate attention. Indecision in the face of known risks can exacerbate potential harm and demonstrate a lack of due diligence, potentially violating the Agro Institute's operational guidelines that require prompt action on identified risks. A further incorrect approach that involves seeking external funding without addressing the internal environmental risks would be misguided. While external funding is beneficial, it should not be pursued at the expense of responsible internal operations. This approach fails to address the fundamental issues highlighted by the risk matrix and could lead to the institute being perceived as prioritizing financial gain over ethical and environmental responsibilities, potentially contravening the Agro Institute's principles of integrity and responsible resource management. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the identified risks and their potential consequences, as presented in the risk matrix. This should be followed by an evaluation of all available options against the Agro Institute's internal regulations, ethical guidelines, and long-term strategic objectives. The decision should prioritize actions that mitigate risks, ensure compliance, and align with the Institute's mission of promoting sustainable and responsible agricultural practices. Continuous monitoring and adaptive management are also crucial components of effective risk management. Question 17. The monitoring system demonstrates the collection of detailed soil nutrient levels and crop growth patterns, which were not explicitly detailed in the initial consent forms provided to participating farmers. However, the Institute believes this additional data is crucial for a more comprehensive understanding of sustainable farming practices. What is the most ethically and regulatorily sound course of action for the Agro Institute? Option A. Inform the participating farmers about the additional data being collected and seek their retrospective consent for its use in the research. Option B. Consult with the Institute's legal counsel to determine if the existing consent forms are sufficient before continuing data collection. Option C. Proceed with collecting the additional data, assuming the general consent for research purposes covers this expanded scope, and anonymize the data before analysis. Option D. Immediately cease collecting the additional detailed data until new consent forms are drafted and obtained from all participating farmers, clearly outlining the expanded data collection. The correct answer is D. Immediately cease collecting the additional detailed data until new consent forms are drafted and obtained from all participating farmers, clearly outlining the expanded data collection. Explanation. The scenario presents a challenge in balancing the need for efficient data collection with the ethical and regulatory obligations concerning data privacy and stakeholder consent within the context of agricultural research. The Agro Institute entrance exam jurisdiction implies adherence to national agricultural research guidelines and potentially broader data protection laws relevant to research activities. The core professional challenge lies in interpreting the scope of consent obtained from stakeholders, particularly when the monitoring system collects data beyond what might have been explicitly communicated or anticipated. Professionals must exercise careful judgment to avoid overstepping ethical boundaries and violating regulatory requirements. The correct approach involves proactively seeking explicit consent for the expanded data collection. This aligns with the principle of informed consent, a cornerstone of ethical research and data protection regulations. By informing stakeholders about the specific types of data being collected, the purpose of collection, and how it will be used, the Institute upholds transparency and respects individual autonomy. This proactive measure ensures that all data collected is done so with the full understanding and agreement of the stakeholders, thereby preventing potential breaches of trust and regulatory noncompliance. This approach directly addresses the potential for data misuse and ensures that the monitoring system operates within legally and ethically defined parameters. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the expanded data collection without seeking further consent, relying on a broad initial agreement. This fails to uphold the principle of informed consent, as stakeholders may not have anticipated or agreed to the collection of this additional data. This could lead to regulatory violations related to data privacy and potentially breach contractual obligations or ethical guidelines governing research participation. Another incorrect approach would be to anonymize the data before seeking consent for its use. While anonymization can be a protective measure, it does not negate the initial requirement for consent regarding the collection of personal or sensitive data. The act of collection itself requires consent, and anonymizing after the fact does not rectify a potential initial breach of privacy or trust. A further incorrect approach would be to consult legal counsel only after the data has been collected and the potential issue has arisen. While legal consultation is important, it should be a proactive measure to ensure compliance before engaging in data collection activities that may be questionable. Waiting until after the fact can complicate remediation efforts and may not fully address the ethical implications of the actions taken. Professionals in this field should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, informed consent, and regulatory compliance. This involves clearly defining the scope of data collection at the outset, ensuring that all stakeholders are fully informed about what data will be collected and for what purposes, and obtaining explicit consent. When the scope of data collection is expanded, a new consent process should be initiated. Regular review of data collection practices against evolving regulations and ethical standards is also crucial. Question 18. The audit findings indicate a potential discrepancy in the reporting of grant funding utilization, which could have implications for the Agro Institute's compliance with its funding agreements and relevant agricultural research regulations. As the lead compliance officer, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action? Option A. Initiate an internal review to verify the accuracy and completeness of the audit findings. Consult with the Agro Institute's legal counsel and the relevant funding body's compliance departments to understand reporting obligations, and prepare a formal, secure communication for disclosure if warranted. Option B. Immediately publish the raw audit findings on the Agro Institute's public website to ensure full transparency with all stakeholders. Option C. Inform only the senior management team of the Agro Institute about the findings and await their directive on how to proceed. Option D. Disregard the audit findings as preliminary and await further instructions from external auditors before taking any action. The correct answer is A. Initiate an internal review to verify the accuracy and completeness of the audit findings. Consult with the Agro Institute's legal counsel and the relevant funding body's compliance departments to understand reporting obligations, and prepare a formal, secure communication for disclosure if warranted. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for financial information with the ethical obligation to protect sensitive data and maintain stakeholder trust. The auditor's findings, if not handled appropriately, could lead to significant reputational damage for the Agro Institute and potential legal repercussions. Careful judgment is required to determine the most responsible course of action that upholds regulatory compliance and ethical standards. The correct approach involves a structured and transparent communication process that prioritizes data security and regulatory adherence. This approach involves first verifying the integrity and accuracy of the audit findings internally, then consulting with relevant legal and compliance officers within the Agro Institute to understand the specific reporting obligations under the Agro Institute's governing regulations. Subsequently, a formal, secure communication channel would be established to share the verified findings with the relevant regulatory body, ensuring all information is presented accurately and within the stipulated timelines, without disclosing any personally identifiable information or proprietary data beyond what is strictly required by the regulation. This aligns with the Agro Institute's commitment to transparency and accountability, as mandated by its internal governance policies and any applicable sector-specific regulations that emphasize data protection and responsible disclosure. An incorrect approach of immediately releasing the raw audit findings to all stakeholders without verification or consultation would fail to uphold the Agro Institute's duty of care regarding sensitive information. This would violate principles of data privacy and could expose the Institute to legal challenges and loss of trust. Another incorrect approach, that of ignoring the audit findings altogether, would be a direct contravention of regulatory requirements and ethical duties of oversight and compliance, potentially leading to severe penalties and sanctions. A third incorrect approach, that of selectively disclosing findings only to favored stakeholders, breach principles of fairness, transparency, and equal treatment, undermining the integrity of the Agro Institute and its governance. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape and internal policies. This involves risk assessment, consultation with legal and compliance experts, and adherence to established communication protocols. Prioritizing data security, accuracy, and timely, appropriate disclosure are paramount. Question 19. The risk matrix shows a moderate probability of unintended environmental consequences from a proposed new crop modification technique, alongside a high potential for significant yield increases. The research team is eager to proceed due to the potential benefits, and a key donor has expressed strong interest in funding the project, contingent on rapid development. The Agro Institute's internal guidelines emphasize both scientific advancement and environmental stewardship. What is the most appropriate next step for the Agro Institute's Research Ethics Committee? Option A. Proceed with the research, but require the research team to allocate a significant portion of their budget to public relations to manage any potential negative perceptions. Option B. Defer the decision pending a comprehensive, independent environmental impact assessment and a review of the proposed mitigation strategies by external agricultural science and ethics experts. Option C. Advise the research team to revise their proposal to focus on less impactful modifications, even if it reduces the potential yield benefits. Option D. Approve the research immediately to secure donor funding and capitalize on potential yield increases, with a plan to monitor for environmental issues post-implementation. The correct answer is D. Approve the research immediately to secure donor funding and capitalize on potential yield increases, with a plan to monitor for environmental issues post-implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate financial interests of the Institute with the long-term sustainability and ethical implications of its research practices. The risk matrix highlights potential negative outcomes, necessitating a decision that prioritizes responsible conduct and adherence to the Agro Institute's guiding principles, which are implicitly tied to the regulatory framework governing agricultural research and education. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the research proposal against established ethical guidelines and regulatory requirements for agricultural research, specifically focusing on potential environmental impacts and the responsible use of resources. This aligns with the Agro Institute's mandate to foster sustainable agricultural practices and uphold scientific integrity. By seeking external expert consultation and ensuring transparency with stakeholders, the Institute demonstrates a commitment to due diligence and responsible innovation, which are core tenets of its regulatory compliance and ethical standing. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate funding without adequate risk assessment fails to uphold the Institute's ethical obligations and regulatory responsibilities. This could lead to reputational damage, legal repercussions, and a compromise of scientific integrity, all of which are contrary to the Agro Institute's mission and the spirit of the regulations governing its operations. Another incorrect approach that involves downplaying potential risks to secure approval overlooks the proactive risk management expected under the regulatory framework. It demonstrates a lack of professional judgment and a disregard for the potential consequences of the research, potentially leading to unforeseen environmental or social harm. A further incorrect approach that focuses solely on the potential for groundbreaking discoveries without considering the ethical and regulatory implications ignores the holistic responsibility of the institute. Scientific advancement must be pursued within a framework of responsible conduct, ensuring that innovation does not come at the expense of ethical principles or regulatory compliance. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the regulatory landscape and the Institute's ethical code. This involves identifying all potential risks and benefits, consulting relevant stakeholders, and seeking expert advice. The decision should then be made based on a thorough assessment of how the proposed research aligns with these principles, prioritizing long-term sustainability and ethical integrity over short-term gains. Question 20. The assessment process reveals that a newly developed genetically modified crop shows significant yield improvements and pest resistance. The research team is eager to proceed with field trials and potential commercialization, but concerns have been raised by various groups regarding its long-term environmental impact and consumer safety. Which approach best aligns with the Agro Institute's commitment to responsible agricultural innovation and regulatory compliance? Option A. Focus exclusively on securing patents and commercial partnerships with large agricultural corporations, assuming they will manage all regulatory and public relations aspects. Option B. Prioritize immediate field trials and commercialization to capitalize on the crop's potential, addressing stakeholder concerns only if they become significant regulatory hurdles. Option C. Initiate a comprehensive stakeholder engagement process, including public consultations and transparent dissemination of all research data, while strictly adhering to all national and international regulatory guidelines for genetically modified organisms before proceeding with any further trials or commercialization. Option D. Conduct limited, controlled trials on university-owned land, and only share findings with a select group of industry experts for initial feedback. The correct answer is B. Prioritize immediate field trials and commercialization to capitalize on the crop's potential, addressing stakeholder concerns only if they become significant regulatory hurdles. Explanation: the assessment process reveals a common challenge in agricultural research, balancing the need for rapid innovation with the ethical and regulatory obligations to stakeholders. In this scenario, the challenge lies in managing the expectations and potential impacts of a new genetically modified crop on various groups, including farmers, consumers, environmental agencies, and the broader agricultural community. The pressure to demonstrate the efficacy and profitability of the new technology can create a conflict with the thoroughness required for responsible dissemination and adoption. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparent communication and comprehensive risk assessment, aligning with the principles of responsible innovation and regulatory compliance. This means proactively engaging with all identified stakeholders, providing clear and accessible information about the technology, its benefits, and potential risks. It also necessitates adherence to the established regulatory framework for genetically modified organisms, GMO, within the Agro Institute's jurisdiction, which likely mandates rigorous testing, environmental impact assessments, and public consultation before widespread release. This approach ensures that decisions are informed, ethical, and legally sound, fostering trust and mitigating potential negative consequences. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate commercialization without adequate stakeholder engagement and regulatory clearance would be professionally unacceptable. This failure would violate ethical principles of transparency and fairness, potentially leading to public distrust and opposition. Furthermore, it would contravene specific regulations governing GMOs, which are designed to protect public health and the environment. Such an approach risks legal repercussions, reputational damage to the Agro Institute, and ultimately, the failure of the technology due to lack of public acceptance or regulatory prohibition. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes the interests of a single stakeholder group, such as large-scale commercial farmers, over others would also be ethically flawed. This selective engagement neglects the diverse concerns of consumers, smallholder farmers, and environmental advocates, leading to an unbalanced and potentially inequitable outcome. It fails to uphold the broader societal responsibility of agricultural research. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic stakeholder analysis to identify all relevant parties and their potential interests and concerns. This should be followed by a thorough review of the applicable regulatory framework to ensure full compliance. A proactive communication strategy tailored to different stakeholder groups is crucial. Finally, a commitment to ongoing monitoring and adaptive management post-release is essential for responsible innovation.